Jones Dairy Farm is a seventh-generation family-owned and operated company located in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. For more than 135 years, Jones has been using real, natural ingredients, original recipes, and time-honored traditions to create distinctive and timeless products. Jones is known for producing premium, all-natural breakfast sausage, naturally smoked hams and Canadian bacon, all-natural meatballs, and dry-aged bacon. All certified gluten-free. Want to get in on some of the magic and fun of the season? There are only a few nights left to experience the zoo after hours under the glow of over 1 million lights. Yes, I'm talking about Zoo Lights at Henry Vilas Zoo. It's $12 for single tickets or 4 for $40, and kids under 3 are free. Runs from now until December 23rd. Don't miss this year's Zoo Lights. Start a special holiday tradition with your family. Get tickets today at henryvilaszoo.gov/lights. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. A big debate in the State House is stirring up some heated points of view on what to do about Sandhill cranes. We've seen the last of the Sandhill cranes in Madison this year, for the most part. According to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, our state sees about 100,000 of these birds migrating through our state each year. And while they are a joy to many, they also cause significant damage to farmers' crops. And shocking to some, a group of lawmakers in the state capitol are looking to cull the population by allowing a Sandhill crane hunt. Joining me to talk about it today is UW-Madison wildlife expert David Drake. David, welcome back to CityCast Madison.
Thank you so much for having me back on, Bianca. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. As I mentioned up top, there is once again a call to allow for the hunt of Sandhill cranes, which is unsurprisingly a pretty touchy subject. Before we dive into the specifics of the proposed bill, I just want to take a beat and say, wowza, what a situation we're in. And I think I know the answer to this, but are you surprised by this push for a crane hunt?
No, this is, I believe, the third time since 2012 that they've tried to push legislation through to enact a Sandhill crane hunt in Wisconsin. I think the same discussion points and arguments are coming up as it has in the previous two attempts.
Okay. Well, yeah, so the bill was introduced, or this latest bill was introduced earlier this spring to allow for licensed hunting of sandhill cranes if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approves it. Obviously, we have a hunting season for deer, for turkey, and all kinds of other small game, but cranes from the Save the Cranes, I think that's what's getting folks riled up. And frankly, there's a lot of high emotions on both sides. Can you help me understand the two sides of the argument? What's going on for the call to hunt and the call to not hunt?
Yeah, for sure. And if you would allow me just a little latitude, I might just step back for a second and just talk about cranes in general.
Oh, please.
Partly because we have roughly 400 bird species that call Wisconsin home. So most of those depart our area in the fall and are not here through the winter months because they're smarter than most of us humans. They're someplace warm and sunny and enjoying some more delightful weather than we are currently right now in Wisconsin. But of the 400 bird species, there's a lot of birds that are unknown to people. Even if they see them, they don't recognize them. They probably couldn't identify them to a species, for example, things like that. But there are a select number of species like robins and cardinals and Canada geese that people generally recognize and delight in seeing them. And I think the sandhill cranes is one of those species that we can add to that list where they are a recognizable bird because they're one of the largest bird species we have in the state of Wisconsin. And then the other issue is sandhill cranes are becoming more of an urban adapted species. So we're seeing them more and more often in urban areas. And we see them in Madison quite often. And so that's another opportunity for people to see them and start to associate with these birds, familiarize themselves with the birds and things like that. And I think when we get, as a human species, when we start talking about doing harm to things that we recognize or that we may have some affinity for, obviously, this no longer becomes a logical argument. It starts becoming an emotional argument as well. And that's neither right nor wrong. It's just, I think, the human condition. And I think that's where we are right now with this idea about a sandhill crane hunt. So the other couple of things that are contextual to this is that Wisconsin still has a strong hunting tradition. If you look at all the other 50 states across the spectrum of those states where most of the population is not that involved in hunting, or more of the population is involved in hunting, certainly Wisconsin is on that end of the spectrum where, we've gotten probably a stronger hunting culture in our state than per se, California, for example, or New Jersey, or some of these other states that are more populated, more urban, things of that nature. So there's a general tendency to want to hunt because of that culture and having hunting opportunities across multiple species. And so that's part of the mix here. The other issue, though, is that, about almost 75% of Wisconsin lives in urbanized landscapes. And as we've become more urbanized as a human population, we tend not to hunt as much because there's not necessarily a need to do that. We can more conveniently and easily go to the grocery store for our food. A lot of times people don't have the opportunity, they don't have the time to hunt, they don't have a place to hunt, especially as they move into cities, because all of a sudden, maybe the farm you grew up on and you had access to that farmland, you no longer have access to that. So as we've evolved to more of an urban population amongst the humans, fewer and fewer of us hunt. And because there's a reduction in hunting, there's also a decrease in support for lethal management of a lot of different species. And I think that's what you're seeing here, is that there's this conflict between those who live in urban areas and are not really absorbing the impact of a growing sandhill crane population, and those that live in rural areas, especially the agricultural community, that is bearing the brunt of that impact based on agricultural damage. And because a minority of the population lives in rural areas, they don't have as much political standing, they don't have as much political weight as perhaps those that live in urban areas, just purely because of the numbers of people that live in urban versus rural. And so, this mimics to some extent that conflict we see in other political arenas between urban and rural populace. And so I think that's where we are right now. There's a hunt proposed, and one of the reasons that they're giving for the proposition of the hunt is to lessen the amount of sandhill crane impact on agricultural producers.
Right. So that's what we're hearing, right, is that it's really impacting farmers' fields and what kind of damage is being done. I just want to say, as an urbanite these days, I did grow up in Baraboo, and I really feel like in terms of this debate, I'm between the two, where I've lived on a farm and know what goes into maintaining the fields and all of that. And I also volunteered at the International Crane Foundation and grew up with such pride at, look at what we've done, look at what we've been able to do. And at one point, the sandhill crane was endangered, right? It wasn't anywhere near where it is now. So actually, maybe first, if you could give context to, I think there are probably a handful of people out there that might think sandhill cranes are endangered, that there's just really maybe not an understanding of where they are at population health-wise.
Yeah, so we have two primary crane species in Wisconsin. So one is the sandhill crane, and one is the whooping crane. So the whooping crane is federally protected as an endangered species. The sandhill crane is not protected. That population is sustainable, it's healthy. At one time, it was pretty low. I'm not sure if it was actually endangered. It may have been endangered at the state level in some states. I'm not sure. I don't believe it was federally endangered like the whooping crane is. The whooping crane has not recovered nearly as quickly as the sandhill crane population, but it's estimated that there's probably over 500,000 sandhill cranes in continental United States. It's a healthy population of birds.
And to return to the question about what the impact is, what's happening for farmers in terms of where the sandhill cranes are having the most impact?
Yeah, so sandhill cranes are a migratory species. They're one of the earliest returning birds, so they come back into our state pretty early in late winter, early spring, depending on the winter we're having that year. And they're one of the latest migrating birds out of our state. So it's not uncommon, especially if we don't have snow and on the ground, it's not uncommon to see sandhill cranes, into December, especially in the southern part of the state of Wisconsin. But they do eventually migrate south for at least a couple of months before they come back. But what happens typically in the springtime is when most of the damage occurs, and it typically is focused on corn crop. And obviously, the agricultural community here in Wisconsin, as with many other states, if you're a row crop farmer, you're usually cropping in rotation corn and soybeans. So you're putting corn in one year, and then the next year you're typically putting soybean in that field. When the corn's planted, what happens typically is the sandhill cranes will come, and they will, as that little plant starts coming out of the corn seed, before it actually comes up through the soil, sandhill cranes will just go down the row, and with their bill or their beak, they'll just probe right into the soil, and they'll actually pull that corn seed right out of the soil.
Oh, no.
And they'll eat it.
They're undoing the work.
They're undoing all the work. And so they'll literally just go down the row and completely decimate the newly planted corn seed. And typically they hit it from about the day it's planted to about 17 days after planting, somewhere in there. So, from a farmer standpoint, you have got a lot of investment in obviously buying that seed, prepping the field, planting the seed. And if you need to do that all over again, essentially you are doubling your inputs and you're not getting double the output back at harvest in the following fall. And so that's what the primary impact is. It's primarily on seed corn that's been planted in the farm field.
Okay, and how about the other side of the argument? It seems like there are a lot of folks who say, please keep this illegal. Do not have a hunt of sandhill cranes. You mentioned at the top, maybe some of that is on the emotional side. But the International Crane Foundation, who is widely respected, is staunchly opposed to a crane hunt. They've publicly stated that the hunt won't actually have any meaningful impact on the farmers who are dealing with crop damage. That's their claim. And that in the spirit of wetland preservation, the cranes need protection. Plus, they say Wisconsinites largely don't support a crane hunt. That comes from a recent survey they funded in partnership with the Nelson Institute. So can we talk about the other side of the coin?
Yeah, so the other side of the coin is that, as proposed, if we did have a sandhill crane field hunting season in Wisconsin, it would be during the fall, because in the springtime when the sandhill cranes are actually nesting, they don't want to have an impact on the reproductive productivity of the birds in the springtime. So the sandhill crane hunt would be restricted to just the fall, but most of the damage is occurring in the spring. And so the question is, if you have a hunt in the fall and you reduce the population in the fall, will you actually see the benefit of that hunt following through into the springtime, or will you continue to have the same type of damage and the same level or severity of damage that has been experienced prior to a hunt? And so that's one of the questions in this issue.
What do you think as a wildlife ecologist? Do you have any pulse on that?
Yeah, I think it is probably unlikely that you would have an impact, a severe enough impact to reduce significantly the damage in the spring. However, if you look at the deer population, and deer are another species that has severe negative impacts on agricultural products, that typically we have a hunting season, depending on where you are in the state and depending on what tool you decide to harvest those deer, you might be able to harvest deer from September all the way into January, or into the heart of winter. There's some information that would suggest if you put enough harvest pressure on deer, that you can reduce the amount of agricultural damage going into that following growing season, from spring through summer into the fall harvest. And so possibly you could structure that hunt for the sandhill cranes so that you would have enough harvest pressure on the sandhill crane population that it would reduce, perhaps at least locally, some agricultural damage in the spring. But I think that's yet to be determined.
Give Jones Dairy Farm all-natural turkey sausage a try the next time you're in the freezer section. It's free from preservatives, additives, nitrates, and certified gluten-free. It's a lower fat and calorie option to their traditional pork and is packed with protein. Not just for breakfast, try it sliced up in a soup or pasta dish, making meals easy and delicious to whip up. They're fully cooked and have clean labels. Jones, making mealtime better since 1889. Root to Rise helps Dane County high school students, especially those who haven't yet found joy in their education, get on a stronger path by supporting younger children in elementary classrooms across Dane County. Each day, they sit beside kids during reading and math, answering questions, offering encouragement, and building the kind of trusting connection children naturally respond to. Teachers notice it right away. They call these teens, quote, extra hands, extra voices, and extra leaders, and say classrooms feel more productive with them there. And for many students, this becomes a turning point. As one shared, Root to Rise changed my life. When I started, I didn't care about school and didn't think I'd graduate, but working with younger kids changed everything. I got more confident and I wanted to do better for them and for myself. If you believe in giving young people a strong path forward, please consider supporting Root to Rise's work. Go to roottorise.org. That's root, the number 2, rise.org. Hey you, if you're currently riding the gift-giving struggle bus, I want to put you on some game. Aura Frames, the award-winning digital picture frame, is an answer to every holiday gifting moment. I mean it. Giving an Aura frame can make holiday shopping so much easier for you. I gifted their Carver matte frame to my aunt, the photographer in my family, who's known for her thoughtful gifts and keeping extended family close. She lit up. And that Aura frame now lights up her office with family memories. With Aura Frames, you get unlimited free photo and video uploads, and you can even preload photos on it before it ships. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code CITYCAST at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code CITYCAST. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. And support this show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Do we have any sense of the economic damage that is being done?
Yeah.
What are farmers shouldering right now?
Yeah, I think the most recent estimate I saw is roughly $2 million statewide is being done. And again, it's not necessarily universal across the state. I mean, that's one of the things with wildlife damage is it can be very local, and it can really impact a single farmer where they might take the brunt of the damage within that municipality or that county, and other farmers may have a lesser amount of damage or no damage at all. So that's part of the issue, is who's actually suffering the impact of this, and how does that burden get spread across society? So that's one of the issues at hand here. There are some currently ways to reduce sandhill crane damage, especially to corn, and one is a repellent that the farmer would actually treat the seed with in the seed hopper, and it's called Avapel. And the active ingredient is anthraquinone, which is used in goose repellents and some other repellents for other species of wildlife. If the sandhill cranes come and start to eat that seed, it makes them not feel well. So it gives them diarrhea, upset stomach, things like that. And the idea is, if they're in there and all of a sudden they're eating something they're not feeling well, they're going to shy away from that area because it didn't make them feel well, whatever they're eating. And there is evidence to suggest that Avapel is a pretty effective and efficient repellent, but it's also very costly. Not only do you have to buy the repellent, you also have to apply it. And again, that's another input cost for farmers. So from a farmer standpoint, if you're farming and you're on the margin, for example, of actually making a profit, the more inputs that you have to buy, the less money you're making. And not in addition to the fact that I think from a farmer standpoint, not only are they bearing the economic burden, but they're also bearing the burden of, like, why is all the responsibility on me as a farmer? Why do I have to take all the responsibility to try to combat this agricultural damage? Why can't we spread it more evenly across the society? And one of the ways to do that is perhaps to have a hunting opportunity. The other issue is the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources runs a program called the Wisconsin Damage Abatement and Claims Program. And so that is a program where agricultural producers that produce a wide range of agricultural products that they can apply to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources for cost share assistance to reduce or perhaps eliminate damage to agricultural products from deer, bear, turkey, and Canada geese currently. Elk as well. So sandhill cranes would be eligible for that program. So if you're a farmer and you're getting damage from sandhill cranes, If sandhill cranes are a huntable species, farmers would be eligible for that program. So they could not only get cost share assistance to help stop or reduce sandhill crane damage, but after they put that management practice into place, and if damage is continuing, they could then apply for financial compensation to get compensated by the state for the damage that they're experiencing. But the reason that the species has to be hunted is because they take license fees, some of the license fee for that particular species, and that's how they fund the damage abatement and claims program. And so when the sandhill crane is not a huntable species, even though the farmers experience the damage from the sandhill crane, they're not eligible for that damage abatement and claims program. And so that's the other kicker here, is if this becomes a huntable species, there's broader assistance for those farmers in addition to AVAPEL.
I know any kind of discussion of wildlife management that includes killing animals, there are groups that will be unhappy with that no matter what. Wildlife management in that form is happening. People do have an impact on populations that, I dare I say the wolf population, but there are creatures that live among us that we love that also cause serious damage, like the sandhill cranes. And I can't help but think about, how does one animal get on a list to be protected or to get on a list to be hunted? How do officials and organizations make those determinations? What role does public favor have in that? I'm thinking, some species, cranes are so beautiful. They're majestic. They're revered by different cultures. Are the beautiful species seen as sacred cows, for lack of a better term, to be protected at all costs? Or when does that threshold tip? I know that's at the core of this conversation.
Well, how much time do you have? we could delve into this, and we could go down a rabbit hole for days if you wanted to. I'll give you a couple of nuggets of information here. So a couple of things. The way that it is decided as to whether a species is hunted or not ultimately rests on the decision of a wildlife management agency. So sandhill cranes are a migratory species, and because of that, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has a say in whether the sandhill cranes will be hunted or not. But the United States Fish and Wildlife Services also, they have the ultimate authority over hunting of sandhill cranes because sandhill cranes are a migratory species. So any animal that's migratory, which means that they spend part of their life in more than one state or more than one country, they automatically are becoming a federal species because they're moving across state boundaries. And in order for you to have consistent management across jurisdictions, the federal government then steps in and says, we are going to, in conjunction and collaboration with the state agencies, we're going to manage the species because it's a migratory species. So ultimately, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service would have say, even if this bill passes in the state, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has to weigh in and say yes or no, we would agree to this hunt or not. I suspect that they would because they've agreed to hunts for sandhill cranes in 17 other states. But that's one of the issues, is the management agency, who is legislative mandated either at the federal or state level, they have to conduct research and collect enough data to suggest that if we harvest this species, if we harvest either by trapping or hunting or fishing or however you want to do it, if we harvest this species, that we can do it sustainably without harming the overall population of this species, so that we can at least maintain a healthy number of this species. Or a lot of times, if the population is growing and you're seeing some negative impacts to society, whatever those impacts might be, you might take off the surplus of that species to maintain the species at some level to try to maintain a balance between the sustainability for that species, but also maintaining a balance between whatever the impacts are to society. And so ultimately, that's what it becomes a biological decision.
I do want to get back to the bill, because in the proposed bill, they're also putting forward financial reimbursements for farmers who are negatively impacted by sandhill cranes, which I think is important. And we covered that a little bit about what's possible.
You're right. I think it depends on what comes out of the bill. But what I saw as of the last hearing, which was on November 19th, I believe, is that I didn't see any mention of the compensation for farmers through the Wisconsin Damage Abatement and Compensation Program. What I saw was compensation for the cost of AVAPEL, that repellent. And so in the bill, farmers would get compensated up to 50% for the cost of the purchase of Avapel, which is that repellent we talked about for corn. And so I think there's some I don't know, controversy is not the right word, but there's some discussion about what in this bill is, if you really are going to try to give some salvation to farmers, what's the best way to do that? And if you're having a hunt in the fall, that may or may not be the best way to do it. But I think what some of the information I saw is that the farmers are saying, listen, if you really want to help us, don't say we're going to have a hunt to benefit farmers if really what you're trying to do is to provide an additional recreational hunting opportunity for sandhill cranes. If you really want to help us, do that by having that hunt, but also by perhaps funding some kind of a subsidy program where we can get compensation for the cost of Avapel, for example, or we can then become eligible for assistance and compensation through the Wisconsin Damage Abatement and Claims Program. So I think that's where the discussion is this bill under guise of creating another hunting opportunity?
Right.
Or is it under the guise to help farmers, or is it a combination of both?
They really get used a lot for political purposes. And so I'm glad that you identified kind of the meat of the concern there. Were there other kind of top takeaways from the hearing that you feel like are worthy to share that we haven't touched on?
From the standpoint of those who may be opposed to a harvest season for sandhill cranes, and there's some legitimate concerns there, obviously. One of the issues is, as we've talked about, the sandhill crane population hasn't always been this healthy. And when I say healthy, I mean, we can talk about health in terms of like immune system health or the healthiness of the body of that bird. But what I'm talking about when I say healthy, the populations are healthy, is that the populations have enough numbers, there's enough individuals in that population, that population as a whole is healthy. So if you were to have a hunt and they would do it sustainably, they would not over-harvest sandhill cranes. If they were to have a hunt, that population could absorb the harvest of however many individuals they set as the limit for each year, that population could absorb that harvest. But there are people who are concerned because, again, we haven't always had the best relationship with wildlife. We have over-harvested wildlife, prior to wildlife agencies coming into effect. So prior to 1900, we were a very consumptive society, and we obviously over-harvested a whole bunch of different species. So there's still that lingering history.
In there?
Beaver, beaver, passenger pigeon, deer, all sorts of different species. So there is that legacy or that history there that people point to, and that that there's some legitimacy to that conversation. However, every single state wildlife agency, the United States Fish and Wildlife Agency, they're all professionals. They are not interested in the least in over-harvesting species. They're not interested in the least of having a harvest season on a population that responsibly and ethically cannot sustain a population. So we're never going to get back to those dark days pre-1900 where we over-harvested species. That's just not going to ever happen again. The other legitimate concern is that we talked about the second type of crane in Wisconsin is the whooping crane. And the whooping crane is a federally protected species. They look totally different than sandhill cranes. Sandhill cranes are grayish with some kind of rusty modeling on them and a red cap. Whooping cranes are all white with a red or rusty cap. And when the whooping cranes are flying, they're a great big white bird. They've got black wingtips. It's very, very difficult, I think, to confuse a sandhill crane with a whooping crane. But there is concern, and this has been played out in other states where you do have a sandhill crane harvest, that a hunter would mistake a whooping crane for a sandhill crane and accidentally shoot a whooping crane. And that
Which would be, it's devastating to lose a
Yeah,
crane.
that's not a good thing, because the whooping crane is not as healthy in terms of population numbers. And so there's a concern there for sure.
Do you have a sense of like how less so? Because the whooping cranes, I felt like were still in trouble.
They are in trouble. They're still trying to recover the species. They're making some strides, but the population's not bouncing back, in great numbers. So there's still a legitimate reason to have federal protection for the whooping cranes for sure.
Yeah, I saw that in the spring, this from the Smithsonian magazine, but more than 1,500 sandhill cranes in Indiana died from the avian flu.
Yeah.
So, and this fall, a whooping crane died at the International Crane Foundation.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's a real concern because, for example, if that starts happening, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they can suspend a sandhill crane hunt anytime they want to. So if, for example, they start seeing, hey, the population started to dip a little bit because of disease or because of predation or whatever the case is, they can suspend that hunt. And so I think that argument is probably not as legitimate as, maybe some of the other arguments, the side of this is why we don't want to hunt.
Well, we've given so much great context, and by we, I mean you. And this is such a fascinating and important and socially complex conversation and issue that we're digging into. And as you mentioned, this is not the first time that a bill for a hunt has been put forward. In recent years, it's the third time since 2012. And I'm curious, how that debate was in the past. You said at the top of this conversation, it's kind of similar issues that have been ongoing. What are you thinking with everything we know now about Wisconsin, and will it ever have a crane hunt? How do you see this going?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In my professional opinion, I think that there certainly, just from a standpoint of can the crane population in Wisconsin, can they sustain a harvest? I would say yes. I mean, I think that there's enough cranes here. There's enough reproduction each year. Clearly, there's an impact. I mean, one of the reasons you have a harvest is for economic revenue. You have a harvest for recreational opportunities. You have a harvest because it's one of the most cost-effective ways of actually managing a population. But you also have a harvest because you're trying to balance all these different issues in society. And so I think there's enough merit there to actually have a harvest. Okay. I think the X variable to me is that the International Crane Foundation is in Baraboo, as you've referred to this already.
My hometown.
And the International Crane Foundation is an awesome foundation. If you've never been there, please go. They've got representatives of every crane in the world, in the entire world, there in Baraboo, and it is an awesome place. The people up there are unbelievably passionate in what they do. They're extremely professional. They're great advocates for cranes, not just sandhill cranes and whooping cranes, but cranes around the world. And because they're such a strong advocacy group and such a strong lobby, that's the X variable. If we don't have a hunt here in Wisconsin, I think it might be partly because the Crane Foundation is such a strong presence in a lobby and advocate for cranes. And to me, that's the X factor, is how strong an advocate can they be in that political arena.
Yeah. I mean, I have crane Christmas ornaments and crane stuffed animals and crane books. And I'm as craned up as you can get. And so this conversation is a challenging one, but I think a really important one, obviously, because of the impacts of the population and knowing, people do hunt turkeys and people do eat birds, and lots of people don't eat meat at all in this city. There's lots of good reasons for that as well. So taking this all into account and understanding the full picture and the impacts is really, really important. But yeah, I do want to ask, I guess, before I let you go, what do you hope folks keep in mind as this debate carries forward, regardless of the outcome?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost is you can have confidence in the state wildlife agency. You can have confidence in the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I mean, they are true professionals. They want what's best for the resource. They're in a very, very tough place because this is, we're not just looking at this from a biological or a scientific standpoint. Obviously, there's political issues here at play. If a hunt does get approved through the state legislature, I would suspect that it may get challenged in court. So it might get, there might be a lawsuit that would suspend the hunt that way. So it is a very, very complicated issue simply because people are involved and emotionally involved and things like that. So that's really difficult. But I do want people to know that the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they care about these species, even if they're approving a hunt. They care about these species as much, if not more, than the average person does. They've made their livelihood of protecting this resource. They're professionally trained to manage these resources the best that they possibly can. And so please know that you can have confidence in these wildlife professionals first and foremost. And I think the other thing is, just because if there is a hunt, that it can be done responsibly and ethically and legally, and it's not going to damage the overall population. I think this is another issue that, again, we could talk about this for days, Bianca, and go down a rabbit hole. But one of the things that has occurred as we've become more of an urbanized population is our perspective has shifted from looking at wildlife as a population to looking at wildlife as individuals. And with that change in perspective to the individual perspective, we've become, as a population as a whole, much more animal welfare oriented than we have. And so when you start thinking about shooting an animal, people don't think about, well, we need to regulate or manage the population to manage impacts or to manage the health of that population, whatever the case is. A lot of times people start thinking, well, that individual is suffering. We don't need to kill that individual. And when you start thinking about things on an individual basis, from an animal welfare or animal humane standpoint, that changes that ball game pretty quickly, because all of a sudden it becomes a very emotional argument. And so that, I think, is the crux of a lot of this, is what is our perspective? Are we looking at the population, or are we looking at individuals?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm an emotional gal, so I won't say my point of view. But I appreciate having an expert ecologist on to really give us some insight into this complicated situation. Or maybe it's not that complicated. We've laid it out pretty well. And by we, once again, I mean you, David Drake.
Well, let me just add, you and everybody else is entitled to how you feel in your opinion. I'm not trying to say in any way, if you believe in animal welfare, or if you're looking at individual animal health, that's wrong. In no way am I saying that. It's just there has been a notable shift in the public's perception of wildlife, and that's part of that shift. So that's the only thing I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah, totally fair. All right, David Drake, UW-Madison Wildlife Specialist, thank you so much for coming on CityCast Madison.
You're welcome. Invite me anytime. I love having our conversations.
That's David Drake, UW-Madison Professor of Forest and Wildlife Ecology and Extension Wildlife Specialist. And hey, I want to do a thank you to our new neighbors who just joined us during our winter membership campaign. A huge shout out to Caleb H., Joan M., Jody W., Angela T., Carrie N., and Lynn B. We've got even more names to thank, but we're spreading out the love across this week. So thank you for joining as neighbors. You are in the right squad. And thank you to all of our existing neighbors who are the best. If you want to join the cool kids, sign up, become a neighbor today at membership.citycast.fm. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with someone who's passionate about our ecosystems? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care.